This is a toolbox that was used in the 570 Polaris Sportsman from roughly 2014 to 2020. And as you can see in the 2021, there's just a body part where the toolbox used to be and an empty cavity that has no toolbox. So what I decided to do is put a couple of 4-inch ABS sewer pipes in that cavity, and they're each about a foot long and probably half to 2/3 of the original volume. On the exhaust side is a wrap of some thin heat insulator material just to keep the muffler from getting that right side tube too hot. Here's the left side, just the standard tube, kind of gives you an idea what the finished product looks like. You'll need to buy 26 inches or so of 4-inch Schedule 80 ABS sewer pipe, so you can make a couple of 12.5-inch sections, 2 end caps, and a couple of Oatly 33403 4-inch plugs, and they're about $5 or $6 each. Also get some aluminized heat barrier for the tube closest to the exhaust muffler. I think it's like 12 by 24 inches, and I just wrapped the whole thing in one wrap. It's thin, it's got a sticky back, and then I used some hose clamps to hold it on with. Hose clamps are hard to find, so here's the ones I bought from Amazon. They fit just fine. And the 2 tubes and the 2 tool kits that I put inside of them. There's 4 sets of bolts from the back to the front, basically at 0 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches, and 15 or 16 inches. We're going to pull the ones at 0 and the ones at 8. The bolt on the top is an M8 with a 1.25 millimeter pitch and a 13 millimeter head. That length is 65 millimeters. It needs to be replaced with one that's 5 millimeters longer at 70 millimeters. That'll accommodate the bracket that we're going to bolt to the top. So true to form, Polaris mixes English and metric. On the left, you've got the M8 13 millimeter metric bolt with a hardness of 8.8, and on the right, you've got a 5/16 inch bolt with a half-inch head that's a grade 5 bolt. And it turns out that 8.8 and grade 5 are both about the same hardness, and you can torque them down to 23 Newton meters. The one in the middle is the longer one I picked, which is harder, but it'll work. So the 4 top bolts are 5/16 inch carriage bolts, and they're 1 inch long and used to hold the ABS tubes to the spacing bracket above and to the forward bracket below. The bottom left 2 are standard 5/16 inch hex head bolts, 1.5 inches long, and they'll be mounted at the rear bracket, and they're there to hold the center of the tube's caps at the back. The bottom right 2 carriage bolts are 1/4 inch and 1 inch long, and there's one on each side, and the chain goes from one to the other to hold in the plug, just in case you're worried about the plug coming back. Note that these are the only 2 that use split lock washers, the small ones, whereas all the rest of this uses blue Loctite to keep things together. I'm worried about Loctite. I guess the blue Loctite, which is kind of a medium strength thread locker, is supposed to be better than split lock washers. So that's what I used. Okay, first set of tools you'll need a 3/8 inch ratchet, 13 millimeter socket, a 1/2 inch socket, and a 13 millimeter deep reach socket, 3/8 inch torque wrench set to 23 Newton meters, a 6 inch and a 10 inch 3/8 inch extension, which you'll use for tightening those rear nuts from the front of the open tubes, and a tape measure. Okay, more tools. A hacksaw for cutting the two tubes to length, 6-inch metal ruler, blue painter's tape, and a felt pen, and a scribe open to about 2.5 inches. Here we've got a cordless drill and an impact driver, a small starter drill bit, maybe like 3/32 of an inch, 5/16 inch drill bit, and a 3/8 inch drill bit. Forget the other one that's shown and forget the awl. Also a spring-driven punch, which is called an automatic center punch for starting the holes in the metal, and then a countersink bit, which will be used to clean out all the sharp edges after the metal holes are drilled, and then machine oil for your drill bits. And the final tools that I missed earlier: vinyl gloves, hearing and eye protection, a couple of 1/4 inch nuts and split lock washers, a 5/16 inch socket, and a hex to 1/4 inch drive bit to use the drill to tighten down the heat shield hose clamps, a 7/16 inch wrench for the 1/4 inch side bolts, ABS cement, flashlight, clippers for the hose clamps excess ends, and scissors to cut the heat shield material. An old drill press makes the drilling a lot easier if you have access to one. And a bench grinder and a hand grinder also help if you want to take off the burrs and the edges of the metal that you've cut. This is an old $200 jet bandsaw that I used to cut the metal strips to length. So first, build up the brackets, cut them to length, and center all the holes between the lengths. And the holes for mounting to the 4 frame bolts will be 3/8 of an inch diameter, and the other holes for mounting to tubes will be 5/16 of an inch diameter. I had all 1/8 inch thick steel that I used. You could use something thinner, I'm sure. And I used 1-inch angle iron, 1-inch flats, and then I had a piece of scrap of sort of a Z-shaped piece that I had lying around. You can certainly fabricate that out of a couple of 1-inch pieces of angle iron. So I ended up welding one of the flats to the angle iron, but you can bolt them together if you want with some strong straps. The holes that you see in this view of the angle iron don't need to be there. That was kind of a mistake, and the next image will show you the holes that you can't see in this one in the other side of the angle iron. Remove all 4 frame nuts and bolts, and for the angle iron, which mounts in the very back, cut it to 5 inches and center your 2 3/8 inch frame holes at 80 millimeter spacing. Next, cut 2 of the 1-inch steel straps to 7 inches in length each, and center the 2 5/16 holes at 5.5 inches. Both of those straps will be identical. And finally, measure the distance between those 2 frame bolts side to side that you removed, which were about 8 inches forward from the back. Mine was 8 5/8 inches. Yours may be a little bit different. Cut the angle iron or the Z piece to 1 inch longer. I cut mine then to 9 5/8 of an inch and drilled my 3/8 inch holes 8 5/8 inches apart. The goal here is to add forward support and lift those 2 ABS tubes about 1 inch above the frame. So in this hand-drawn picture, you can just take a couple of 1-inch angle iron pieces and bolt them together to make that Z that I was talking about. For the top piece, you drill your 5/16 inch holes that are spaced 5.5 inches apart. And with all this, clean out the holes with that countersink and grind off the sharp edges, and either weld it to step or powder coat or paint. Bolt your pieces together if you're using those 2 1-inch angle irons to make that 1-inch step up. So here's what it's going to look like after you bolt everything together. Install the 1.5 inch long 5/16 bolts, and from back to front, you see you've got a bolt head, a flat washer, your bracket, another flat washer, and a nut that's been Loctited down. And you can do that on both ends and tighten it down, and you'll end up sandwiching the tube back between a couple of flat washers. Now just install the assembly permanently in the back. Drop in your longer 70mm M8 bolts and torque them down to 23 Newton meters. And you'll need that 13mm deep reach socket above to hold down the bolt heads while you're torquing. It should kind of look like this image here. Now, building up the two tubes, the first step is to cut each one to 12.5 inches in length. And I'm not really good at making big ABS cuts, so I decide how far back I want to cut, and then I wrap some tape, and then every half inch or so I'll just mark the cut with a felt pen, and I open up my vice's jaws to about 3 inches. I lay down a rag and put the tube over the top, and then with one hand I hold it and rotate it, and the other hand I make small hacksaw cuts while I rotate the tube. And so after a while the blade just sort of finds the groove, and you'll just keep going around and around until you've got a nice clean cut. Clean the inside and the outside burrs with a utility knife or a file, which are tools I forgot to mention previously. Glue each cap in place with your ABS cement, and then you need to drill a 5/16 hole in the center of the back of that cap. And to do that, just use something like a scribe, which I had in the picture, and hold it against the back edge and just scratch an arc near the center. And after you repeat this in 5 or 6 different places around the edge, not caring if it's too short or too long, it'll be obvious where you want to drill that hole. So put the bit in and out a few times just to try to make the hole a tad larger than 5/16. And now we'll drill 3 more holes in each tube. So temporarily bolt down the front frame piece with the original bolts and nuts, and there's no need to torque it. This will just be used to decide where to drill the tube holes to bolt down to the forward piece. Measure the distance from the rear tube mounting bolts to the forward tube mounting holes. It should be about 9 to 10 inches. And now measure that distance on each tube from the back towards the front, and put a generous amount of tape there so you can mark on it with the felt pen. The tube caps are hard to get into place to clear the metal frame and the plastic body when you slide that stuff back, and I was able to stand on the exhaust side of the machine and push these through a cavity on the opposite side. You'll see it, and you can slip it in there with a little bit of force. It pops right in. And then what you want to do is add a flat washer to each of the rear bolts, push the tubes in place, and then add a flat washer on the inside and a nut to each tube. If you rotate the tube so that the tape is over the forward mounting hole, space the tubes about 1 inch apart so that the spacing is the same all the way to the back. Reach under each tube with your felt pen and just mark where the bolt will go through each tube. So again, remove the tubes and the front frame bracket, both of them, or all 3 of them. And then for the carriage bolts, you need to drill a 3/8 inch hole for the 5/16 bolt, and you need to drill a 5/16 hole for the 1/4 inch bolts, because the square part behind that head is a little bit larger than the shank. And so when you tighten them down with the rounded head inside your tubes, they stay in place really well. Drill the holes where you marked them to 3/8 of an inch, and install the carriage bolts to the bottom frame bracket. Add washers and nuts and temporarily tighten them down. So now it's time to add the top holes for the top strap. This strap will keep the whole thing nice and rigid. Make sure that the tubes are parallel, flush with each other, and not pointing in or out. And then on the top of the tubes, measure 6 inches back from the open front and put a piece of tape there with a line across the width of the tubes. 6 inches is important because that should be the distance for the top bolts to clear the plastic body above them when it's installed. This is all pretty close fitting, so lay your flat bracket there with the 5.5 inch space holes and mark where to drill. Drill them both out to 3/8 of an inch and temporarily install that top bracket and the carriage bolts, of course, from the inside, and go through the bracket, and then you got the flat washer and the nut. On the outside of each tube, go back about 2 inches from the front and mark and drill with your 5/16 inch drill for your side keeper 1/4 inch carriage bolts to hold the chain in place in that original picture. Now remove the metal pieces from the tubes and install that forward frame piece or pieces. Put the original 5/16 inch grade 5 bolts back in place and torque the bottom nuts to 23 Newton meters. Put both tubes in place and make sure that you can drop that carriage bolt through the bottom of the tube for the forward frame piece. Again, remove the tubes, pick the one closest to the exhaust and wrap it with the aluminized shield that you cut off to fit. I wrap mine all the way around, which maybe is overkill, and then I use the 5/16 inch socket, adapter, and impact driver to cinch down the first hose clamp over the end cap, and then 2 more along the way heading forward. Be careful not to cover your holes with the clamps, and then cut off the loose ends, and it's pretty easy to feel your 3 hole indents on the top and bottom and side of each tube. Just push those in a bit farther and re-drill. Install the top 2 carriage bolts and tighten them down to secure them in place inside the tubes. You can remove the nuts and washer now, and they'll sort of hold each other in. Add Loctite to the 2 rearmost bolt threads and to these 2 top tube bolt threads, and then put the aluminized tube into place in the back. Put the strap over the top bolt, add a flat washer and a nut, and tighten it permanently. You can push the strap back out of the way a little bit to get the next tube in place. So next, put the black tube in and put the other end of the top strap in place over this one and tighten it down. So now you've got these 2 tubes with that top strap 6 inches back from the front, tightened down on the top. Slip the bottom carriage bolts into place through the tubes and holes in the forward frame bracket. Using both of the 3/8 inch extensions and your 1/2 inch socket, reach through that tube and add the final flat washer and down inside it and the nut, and permanently tighten them down, but not too tight because the tubes are a little bit of an upward angle and the bolts are horizontal. Now add Loctite to the 2 bottom carriage bolts, add washers and nuts and tighten those down, and then add your side 1/4 inch carriage bolts with the flat washer, split washer, and nut, and feel inside to make sure all 3 carriage bolt heads are nice and flush with the tube. That'll keep in the dust and the water out if they're nice and flush against the inside of the tube. Finally, add the 2 red plugs and tighten them down with the wing nuts vertical, and then add that chain. Cut it a little bit longer, and you can twist if you want to shorten it, and that should do it.